Welcome to Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well, the podcast for women who want to lose weight but are tired of counting and calculating all the food. I'm your host, Lisa Salisbury. I'm a certified health and weight loss coach and life coach, and most importantly, a recovered chronic dieter. I'll teach you to figure out why you are eating when you aren't hungry instead of worrying so much about what you are eating. Welcome, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I had my two college adult boys here for the weekend, so everyone was home. We had a lot of yummy food. We went to a football game. If you saw my stories, we went to the BYU Stanford game down at Stanford University on Saturday. So we spent some time in the city before that. So that was really fun, especially because I got to see firsthand my children being excited to get their siblings Christmas presents. I think every one of them bought something for someone else while we were in the city, which I just love to see. That's really fun. So if you want to get to know me a little, you can always follow me on Instagram. I share lots of personal and family stuff in my stories, in addition to free content and things related to all of this weight loss and getting healthy. So I'm on Instagram at well_with_Lisa. And of course, that link is in the show notes. Also, one more piece of housekeeping before we jump into today's episode, and that is I am starting a waitlist for group coaching coming in 2023. So if you aren't on my email list, be sure to grab my Go-To Meals free ebook. That will put you on the list and you can see how then to get on the waitlist for group coaching, which I'm really excited about because I have that program designed and ready to go for you. Now, I'm super excited about today's interview I have for you. I first heard Erin talk on another podcast and I messaged her immediately and said, can you come talk about all that stuff with my audience as well? She is a registered dietitian and super knowledgeable about the ins and outs of healthy diets. One thing my clients tell me is that they aren't really sure what to eat. And you'll hear me talk in the episode about the fact that we start with working on stopping the overeating patterns and then move into improving the quality of the diet. And although I didn't hear Erin say this here in our interview, I've heard her say before that you don't need perfect quality nutrition. Most omnivore type eating patterns outperform anything without meat. So that's going to be one of your big takeaways here is to get adequate protein and specifically adequate proteins from animal sources. But I just don't want you to be overwhelmed and be like, oh, I have to eat all this way perfectly now, because just starting with protein is going to really help. And you'll see how that really translates into this work of healthy eating. We start our conversation with some talk about the blue zones, as it is one of Erin's specialties. And you'll see how that really translates into this work. And I think you might be surprised also by what you learn about the blue zone. So I'm excited for you to hear this chat with Erin Skinner. Okay. So I have Erin Skinner on the podcast today. I'm super excited to meet her. I actually stalked her on Instagram and I was like, I love what you're doing. So would you come and share that with my listeners? So let's start with an introduction from her and how she came to the work that she does.
Hi, thanks for having me on. My name is Erin Skinner. I'm an integrative and functional nutrition practitioner and a dietitian. My private practice is called Empower Nutrition, and we offer insurance-based functional medicine by utilizing the skills of nutrition professionals rather than relying primarily on physicians. But then my other big passion is ancestral nutrition, and so I spend a lot of time working in that space. And then the top 3 things that I work with are people who want help with their digestive health, their metabolic health, and their hormone levels.
Perfect. Fascinating. I love all of that stuff.
Same. Like-minded.
Yeah. Although I'm not a registered dietitian, I'm like, in another life, that's what I would have done. So when I went back to school, I chose health coaching because it was honestly just a little quicker being in my 40s already. But it's, something I've been interested in my whole life. And when I heard you first, you were talking about the blue zones, which is kind of where we're going to start with our conversation today. So tell us what blue zones are. And I know you did quite a research project about that. So tell us all about that. I'm just going to let you talk for a while.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just go for it and stop me. But if I talk too much, but long story short, most people I think have heard of the blue zones.
Probably. Yeah.
I remember when I was a child learning about this and thinking it was like the coolest thing in the world that, oh, they figured out there's these regions on the planet where people are much more likely to live to be a centenarian, which is to live to be 100 years old. And so let's reverse engineer that, see what their lifestyles are like, see what their diets are like, and then just have people, encourage people to follow that pattern. And then you'll also have longevity like these people in these blue zones. So like that's a really
Feels like
cool
magic.
idea that I think is really
Yeah.
attractive to people of like, oh, the secret to long life is like in these long living populations. And but then what I learned as an adult is unfortunately like many things, stories I heard as a child, is actually a fairy tale.
So sad.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think I'm gonna be Prince Charming, although my husband's great. There's
Yeah.
no like pumpkin turning into a carriage going on. But yeah, so basically the functional medicine space got recruited to work at this clinic in California that was basically this owned by this company called Adventist Health. Is a healthcare company that has multiple hospitals in California. And they got excited about the idea of functional medicine. And so they wanted to have a functional medicine clinic in their corporate headquarters and have it be insurance billed. And so they hired, me and this other functional medicine team, like the doctor, the nurse, the pharmacist, the physical therapist, all that. And said, go ahead and figure out how to make this work with insurance. And so that was like the assignment. But then while I was there, it turns out that Blue Zones is not just an idea, it's a company.
Because
Yes.
once it became an idea, then they created books and a whole like
Yes.
trademark around it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And they do a lot of like consulting where they get hired to implement the blue zones like environment in a place. So like a town
Mm-hmm.
might hire them to have their town be more blue zones-esque and
Mm-hmm.
like to help the citizens follow more of a blue zones lifestyle, or company might help with like a corporate blue zones environment with them getting it. So anyway, while I was working at this company, Adventist Health, they purchased the Blue Zones company. And
Okay.
so then it became all about like, okay, we're totally into the Blue Zones now. We're going to be promoting the whole Blue Zones model. We're going to be teaching that. We're going to be trying to get all these employees to start doing that. And so, of course, I'm the only nutrition professional in the building. So, of course, it's like, yeah, I should, look at what this nutrition plan is.
Because that's a big piece of the whole blue zone concept is what they're
Yeah,
eating, correct? Yeah.
huge. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
huge.
huge piece.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that there are other pieces,
There's
but there are.
a lot to it with like connection with other individuals and
Yeah,
their lifestyle, their movement, all of that. But the diet is where things get focused.
exactly. Yeah. So I pulled it up. There's like basically a description of the diet, and it's immediately concerning to me because it's basically like one step removed from a vegan diet. So it's something on
Mm-hmm.
the order of like maybe 1 ounce a day of some animal protein on average. Even fish was discouraged. Eggs are
Mm.
discouraged. Dairy is discouraged. It's essentially a vegan diet, but not labeled as such. And so that's to me an unsafe diet, especially to be recommending on a population level. This isn't like, hey, talk to a healthcare professional about this and ask them if this is appropriate for you. There's no discussion of supplements or any way that you're going to round out the inadequacies of this diet with like
Mm-hmm.
supplementing or anything. It's just, hey, everybody should start eating this way, and like everybody's going to live to be 100. Woo! It's going to be great.
It's like magic.
Yeah. So, but data first, right? So what I did was they actually, part of the what you can get with Blue Zones is you can pay to get access to their meal planner.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay, great. I paid. I was like, I'll buy a subscription. I'll have it generate an individualized meal plan for me. I went and followed that and tracked all my nutrition with my nutritionist software for 3 days. And it turned out that I was inadequate on almost all of the vitamins and minerals and very inadequate on protein on the
Mm-hmm.
diet. So to me, that was like immediately concerning because it's inadequate for me, let alone somebody who's compromised, like a pregnant woman or a child or an elderly person or someone with an injury or chronic illness, an athlete. Like all those people have increased needs. That
Right. Yeah.
it was even inadequate for pouring on me with normal needs. So basically, that was the main research project I did. And then I just kind of put that together with, I'm actually in a doctorate program. So I write a lot of like papers that summarize like a topic, like let's summarize all the peer reviewed literature on a topic. And so I kind of put together a paper that summarized like, okay, here's all the problematic things about vegan diets. Because by the way, the meal plan that it gave me was vegan.
So
So
even
that,
though they allow a little bit, but they say it's discouraged when you put it into the meal plan, they don't actually plan you any.
yeah, it's like this weird little bait and switch thing where like, surprise, you are given this vegan diet without them us telling you that's going to happen. In the end, that didn't even matter because what I did is I said, okay, well, this is like completely inadequate, but what if I went ahead and did put in the 1 ounce a day of animal protein that this diet allows? And like, I think there's like a small allowance of like some dairy. It didn't change the numbers at all. It was just
Because it
like a
wasn't
drop.
enough.
It was yeah, it's like a drop in the bucket. And so it ended up being that, yeah, it didn't matter either way. But yeah, I kind of put that all together of like, hey, here's a summary of the literature on vegan diets and like the problematic things about that. Here's the data that I found. And then I compared that to like, okay, let me put in 3 days of like my typical diet. But no, I was like meeting almost everything on my normal diet. So it's like, yeah, no, it's not like the software is crazy. It's like this meal plan is crazy. So
So what were
that,
like what
yeah,
kinds of specific things? I mean, the protein alone is obviously super concerning,
yeah.
but what kinds of other things do you feel like it was missing?
Well, I mean, like most of the B vitamins, it came in low, and then very little calcium. It came in low on there. There's essentially no choline in it. Zinc was inadequate on it. Selenium, molybdenum. I think magnesium might have been okay. There's essentially no vitamin D in it. There's no preformed vitamin A by definition. Like you can only get that from animal sources.
Mm-hmm.
No EPA and DHA at all because they don't allow that. So it's just like,
And
I
yet
mean,
no recommendation of supplementation on that stuff, even
no.
though it's shown to be super
Yeah.
protective. Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
okay.
the B12 was zero. Like you can't get that from plants. And so, and like I personally had clients with B12 deficiencies. You can get like irreversible neurological damage from a B12 deficiency. No warning of that. None.
So that's crazy.
Yeah.
Why is it that the Blue Zone company has decided that the vegan diet is what Blue Zone folks ate? What happened there? Like, where's the disconnect between
Yeah.
these regions where we did have centenarians
Yeah.
and this diet that is actually like it can't be what they were eating? Like, what happened here?
Yeah. That's a good question. What I found that like really kind of blew my mind when I started to look more into that question was basically there's some really concerning things about these data sets. There's basically like published studies where they've gone in and they've looked at it and they found that like, oh, okay, here's where you can almost predict that there's going to be a blue zone. It's going to be an area where there is a federal pension paid based out on age to a population that has a low income, and
Hmm.
there's poor vital records keeping. So you're poor,
Okay.
you don't have money, but if you can prove that you're a certain age, you can start getting money from the government, and it's easy to prove because you can fake a birth certificate. When you have those three things happening at the same time, you have a blue zone.
So
So,
they're not actually centenarians, is what studies are showing. Is that
right.
what you're saying?
Yeah, and what's even more obvious about it now is like they're going back and like those people that like back in the like 20 years ago when this all became a big thing, some of these like amazing centenarians that were interviewed, like they'll go now and they're like still alive.
So it would make them be like 120 years old.
Yeah, which would be like
Which,
record breaking.
yeah.
Yeah.
So blue zones are like the whole thing is not true, is basically what your research is finding.
Yeah.
Okay. That's so disappointing
I
on so
know.
many levels.
I know. I know, it really is. Yeah, age fraud is like known to be a huge issue with with like longevity research. And so I did try to give them the benefit of the doubt and like look for like, okay, where's their like peer reviewed studies where they've shown that this is like valid and like they have good evidence for it. And there's really none. I mean, they've really gotten away with not having any peer reviewed research or like sharing any data. They all say, they just say they have the data and they don't share it.
So it's
just
not
all,
reproducible.
no.
And really the blue zones was the whole beginning situation was a correlation. It wasn't really a study. They just went in and
Right.
said, we think this maybe correlates.
Right. And within real research, that's not how that works, is to your point, is like you start with some of this like epidemiological type data, which is like the weakest tier of data of like, okay, well, we think we're seeing this correlation between this blue zones lifestyle and longevity. The next step is then an interventional study where you go and take two groups and put one group on the blue zones lifestyle and another group on a different lifestyle, or you compare it to the normal American lifestyle as controls, and then you actually see what happens over time, you know?
But that was never done.
No, definitely not. No. And what else is crazy about the whole thing is like in these areas that are like the blue zones, they've actually found that like if you are like in those populations, in those areas where they're saying where people are more likely to live to 100 years old, those people are also less likely to live to be 65, which doesn't match any like reality in terms of how human life works. But what it does match is like poverty, because again, these are poor areas. And we know that people with poverty have lower longevity and like poorer health outcomes and less likely to live to retirement age. And so in that environment, you also have more of these people who have, of course, like falsified their age in order to get to this age where they get this pension. But that just underscores how messed up it all is. It's like, okay, in no real like place where vital records are kept and like the data is solid, that's not a phenomenon that happens where it's like, if you're unlikely to make it to age 65, that makes you more likely to live to 100. Those two things don't actually naturally go together. It's more that if you're unlikely to, if you live in an environment where you're not likely to live to 65, you're also not likely to make it 100, like as logic would have you believe. That's how it actually works. Yeah.
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 So I'm curious if the poverty also contributes to the inadequate diets.
Yes.
Because
exactly.
That doesn't, it like kind of coordinates that having proper protein and having the proper amount of, nutrients just naturally by having a well-balanced diet, that actually coordinates with poverty. So is that why they're showing that these populations are living more of a vegan lifestyle?
Yes. Yeah.
Which is interesting because veganism is such a privileged diet, because in order to have a proper vegan diet and be healthy, you have to supplement. You have to be privileged enough to, number one, have the knowledge on how to do that. And number two, have the resources to do all the proper supplementation.
Yeah. It's pretty ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just have to say, like, when I first heard this and first learned that like the blue zones weren't a thing, I was so disappointed because one of my like strong driving forces in my health is longevity. I actually do have several centenarians in my ancestry, like one in particular who was my great grandma, and I had a relationship with her all through high school. Like, pretty sure her age wasn't falsified.
Yeah, I'm sure it wasn't.
Yeah. So I know, like, I have it in my DNA. Like, I'm like, okay, the capability is there. And so what can I do now to improve my health? And it's not just the point of like living to 100, although I do tell my kids now, I'm like, you better throw me a huge party when I turn 100. And I always tell them I'm going to live to 100. So some of that's just mindset, but the real driving force there is what I say is I want to be an influence for good on my grandchildren.
Yeah.
Because like that next generation, I remember my great grandma, and she was an influence for good. Yeah. And so that is a big deal for me. And so when learning that this whole like blue zones, which is kind of the gold standard for longevity, wasn't a thing, I'm like, okay, so now what? Where can we find longevity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think there's a lot of really brilliant people working in the longevity space, and there's a lot that we do know about it. But I think that all of that is less sexy than the Blue Zones idea. And so it is still
Yeah.
sad. Like, that was such a fun fairy tale. I mean, it really
Yeah.
was. But yeah, it was just appalling to me to see, like, that it's not even like they've even tried, like, to actually provide any valid, like, proof of any of this. And that I guess they haven't had to, because it's just so exciting, and like National Geographic took on with it, and like, I love National Geographic. Like,
Yeah.
who doesn't love National Geographic? Like, have to love it. Like, it's just all, everything about it is like so attractive. So maybe that's why. But I wouldn't give up on the idea of longevity. I mean, there's a lot of good information, research on that. For example, like the mind diet is evidence based, and that's something that really does show improved. I mean, cognition isn't the only thing about longevity, but you want to think about like quality of life aside from just being alive, right?
Right. Your health span
Your health
matching your
span.
lifespan.
Yeah. So, look at things like the mind diet. That actually is data driven. There's plenty of actual peer reviewed published studies on that. Like, that's a great way to go.
Hmm. So the company that you worked for, Adventist Health, what is their like parent company? Why did they decide to purchase Blue Zones? What was going on there?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that they have a parent company. There are a number of organizations owned by people who are members of the Seventh Day Adventist Church, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of those companies profit from promoting vegetarianism by providing things like vegetarian protein replacements and things like that. And so there's quite a built up culture and climate of like these Adventist businesses promoting veganism almost like a team. And so I think, so even though Blue Zones is not religious affiliated, the community of Adventists in general, I think, has an interest in promoting veganism and vegetarianism, because there is quite a lot of profit that's coming in that way. And so,
One of their like religious tenets to be vegetarian, correct?
well, technically, no. That was like
Oh,
a really interesting thing about working there, because like most of my clients were Adventists. Like, there's a lot of Adventists that work there, and they're now. So next thing I know, all of a sudden I've got all these like vegetarian patients, which was fascinating. But I actually grew up with some family members that were Adventist, and they would just not eat shellfish or pork. And that's
okay.
that's technically what the religion is to not eat shellfish or pork. However, there's this sort of also element of like, if you can go further than that, that's really a good idea. So
Okay.
it's not the law, but it's like the favored behavior. And so, and actually over like last several decades, it's gone more and more towards veganism. So like, a lot of them told me they grew up where like their family would just openly eat like chicken and fish and it was fine. But now that would be something you wouldn't do like around other Adventists, or like say that you do. And so it's kind of been almost like a cultural thing where it's gone that direction. But they did seem a little bit confused on it, where it was like they're hearing things in church that tell that where there's like Bible verses being interpreted as saying that they should be vegan. And
Okay.
so there is some of that messaging that goes on.
I just wondered if it
Yeah.
correlated with this like Blue Zone situation that they were kind of because they purchased it and were kind of becoming associated with it, if it became more part of what they were kind of instructed to do. Because there's also Blue Zone areas of cultures like this too, like the Blue Zone of people that fall in religious groups. And I know one thing you've mentioned is that they also see this longevity with Mormons, which I just told Erin I actually happen to be. Those of you
Yeah.
that listen,
Yeah.
and the only difference, because there's still the same kind of qualifications of no alcohol and no smoking and no, those kinds of things, but that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we eat meat.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of one of the biggest difference. And they're not included. That population is not included in some of these like religious Blue Zone areas.
Right. So like Loma Linda is considered a blue zone, and the Adventists that live there have the same longevity of the Mormons that also live nearby, but they don't consider the Mormon area to be a blue zone. The whole thing is very selective. And so take some random thing like that that's not evidence based, and then to take one piece of it, like the diet piece, and to stick to like clomb onto that and say that's what people should do is crazy. It's just complete madness, especially when the diet is dangerous, to say, oh, well, because we see these people in Loma Linda being long living, therefore everybody should follow this vegan diet. It's just nonsense. Whereas when, like, as you said, there's, for example, Mormons that eat animal protein that live just as long, or
And live
that,
in the same exact area.
yeah. And so maybe it's just that everybody needs to abstain from alcohol, or maybe it's just that everybody needs to have strong social networks like people do who are involved in the church, or maybe it's just that people need
Right.
to have a faith in a higher being that they can depend on, or maybe it's that people need to not smoke, or that they need to get more exercise. And like there's a million things that are all intertwined in people who have healthy lifestyles. And so you can't, that's just like not sound science to take one thing out of it and to recommend that across the board to a population. Skips all logic, all steps of actual evidence-based practice. It's just random like things and whatever, like financial interest, in my opinion.
Yeah. And there is a push in, I think, mainstream media that meat is unhealthy. And
Yeah.
so, it's just kind of cascading on this,
Yeah.
it's all going together. And so I have clients that tell me, well, I want to get healthier, but, I do still eat meat. And they kind of say this with some amount of shame. They're like, well,
Mm.
I probably eat too much red meat. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
it's fine. Like, don't believe that stuff. And it's so damaging what we're hearing in the media, because I think as women, especially, and
Mm-hmm.
most women that I coach are in kind of my age range, 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're just not getting enough protein.
Yeah.
And it's so concerning. How are you seeing that with your clients, or just how are you fighting that with the mainstream media of what people are
Yeah.
seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, I see the same thing, and I'm not shy about it because I do see it as a huge threat to people's health. And so maybe that time that I had working with vegetarians was helpful in the sense of like it got me really comfortable with like those more difficult conversations in a non-threatening and non-blaming way. It's not people's fault that they're confused on nutrition, and it is
Yeah.
hard to know what the right thing is. And so I ask them to maybe don't trust me, don't just take it at face value that whatever I say is right, but like give me a chance for a season. You've come to me for help with problem X. I've got a lot of reps and a lot of experience here. I think that process Y would help you with problem X. And so will you trust me to try that for Z number of days? And if you're not having improvements with problem X, then like tell me to go jump in a lake. And if you are feeling better, then, well, we learned what works well for you. Great. And to kind of take the
Yeah.
whole ethics out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. One thing I tell my clients is your food journal is actually the most important nutritional study you'll ever read,
Yeah.
because finding out what works for you and tracking whether it's digestive symptoms or inflammation. I have a lot of clients that are like, I know when I eat sugar, my knees hurt, because it's like the pain in the joints, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so tracking that kind of stuff and figuring out, like, how do I feel on an increased amount of protein? How do I feel on animal protein versus vegetarian type proteins, which we know aren't complete proteins? How's your energy level different? How are you sleeping different?
Yeah.
And looking at that nutritional study that is your food journal. And that's kind of what you're saying, like, give it a try
Yeah.
and see if
Or
this works for you.
yeah, or even if people aren't ready for that, one thing I'll have people do a lot is I'll say, okay, great. Well, then get this free app. It's called Chronometer. Put your food in there for 3 to 7 days straight, and it's going to tell you all the vitamins and the minerals and the amino acids and the essential fats that you're getting and compared to like your needs. And if you're good, it's going to turn green, and if you're not good, it's not going to turn green. It's very easy to read.
Mhm.
It's a bar graph. Why don't you go ahead and see what your current diet's doing for you, and then when you come back, we'll talk about it.
Mhm.
Usually they come back eating steak.
They come back eating steak.
Like, Oh, weird. Like you were low on almost everything when you didn't eat animal protein because it's a natural complement. And I'm very pro plant. Like I have people eat lots and lots of plant. That's also critical. But it all comes back to like what's the natural human diet? It's not controversial what humans have been eating for like the vast majority of their time on earth. And it's not that we have to eat like the perfect ancestral diet all the time, but it does mean that like, look, this is what humans are wired to have. And the nutrition science is not controversial. Like we talked about with B12. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's like a pretty obvious thing, right? If you don't get B12, you're going to die from neurological damage. You can only get that from animals. Like that kind of
It
tells you it's
seems so
important.
obvious,
Or like if you had a dog and you put a dog on a vegan diet, it would
which
die.
vegans do.
Yeah,
I've
well, it's not going to do well.
sad. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to do well. I mean, obviously you'd have to supplement it, but I don't think that, I mean, maybe for some people they're even confused on that, but I think it's easier for people to think about animals in that way, more of like, okay, it makes sense that an animal should eat its natural diet. Like
Mhm.
in the end, humans are the same way. We're just like animals. We are animals, but like we also need to eat our natural human diet, just in the way that you're like my tortoise. I have a tortoise. He
Oh.
cannot eat a bunch of fruit. It will kill him. And even
Uh,
if I think that fruitarianism is like the best diet for tortoises, that doesn't change the fact that that will kill him if I give him fruit. He needs his natural diet, which is like weeds basically. So we're the same way. Like we only thrive off of our natural diet, and like obviously some people can tolerate more deviation from that than others, and that's great. But to go to such an extreme of eliminating a fundamental tenet of the human diet is no different than if I just gave my tortoise fruit all the time. It just
yeah.
doesn't match with logic, you know?
We are fundamentally omnivores. That's
Yeah.
that just that's just true.
Yeah.
And I think it's important what you're saying. Like plants still are important.
Yeah.
We're not sitting here recommending a carnivore diet,
No.
which please don't do that. Please
No.
don't go swing all the way the other way,
No.
because vegetables, like when you're looking at all of those nutrients, a lot of those things do come from our vegetables,
Hmm.
but we can't get it all from
Right.
vegetables and grains and that sort of thing. So you do a lot of ancestral nutrition, functional nutrition. Where would someone want to start with that? Because where I work more with the thought patterns around food,
Mm.
my clients deal with a lot of like, why am I eating when I'm not hungry? And that sort of thing. I work on overeating patterns and just taking in too much fuel for the body. We definitely do look at what they are eating,
Mm.
but I'm not as specific nutrient focused as you are, because most of my clients are just like, please just help me
Yeah.
stop emotionally eating.
Sure.
So it's kind of the first step, really, is
Yeah.
to say, like, okay, if I can just start eating the amount that is right for my body, then we move into, okay, how can I up level and
Yeah.
crowd out the foods that I don't really want to eat as much? How can I crowd them out with the foods that I do? So when we're thinking
Mm.
about crowding out, I always say, what do we want to add
Yeah.
to the diet? So
Mhm.
what would be your first recommendation on adding, if someone was like, okay, I'm ready, like I'm not overeating anymore.
Mm.
I've been doing that work and I'm ready to actually improve what it is that I'm eating. Where would be the first place for them to start?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you kind of can't be successful in the long term without kind of addressing both sides of that coin. So the mindset piece is critical. So it's so good that you're doing that because I mean, honestly, it ticks me off. Like, especially women, we've been exposed to so much crazy toxic messaging
Mm,
our whole life around food and diets and like our bodies, that who isn't to some level messed up on their in their
yeah,
thinking about food without working on it. And so that's really important, but you have to be careful with only doing that, because if you that can start to approach where you're not anything better than like a calorie deficit or like counting points, because
sure.
you're
Yeah,
expecting it to all come from your mind and like your decision making. Whereas like what's actually happening with obesity is that there are real physiological problems that are happening with your metabolism. Your insulin's messed up. Your mitochondria and their ability to generate energy from fat is messed up. your signaling of hunger hormones like leptin and ghrelin is messed up. Your
Mhm.
inflammatory status is messed up. Your gut health is messed up. And all of those things are not your fault. That's a product of what you've probably, the foods that you've been first probably fed even from like childhood and then later told are healthy for you. But your body is working against you when you're struggling with your weight. And they've tried and they've tried and they've tried and it doesn't work because their body is broken, but they're not getting that message and they're not getting help with healing their metabolism. And so it's like you're fighting your body constantly and nobody can fight forever. You end up losing out. That's why people lose some weight and then they gain it back and then they lose some weight
Yeah.
and then they gain it back because you can only hold out a 20-pound dumbbell in front of you for so long. You get tired.
Right. Totally. We
You
talk
know?
about willpower. I mean, willpower is like a muscle, just like that. It wears out.
Yeah.
You can't depend on willpower forever.
Mhm.
Because it does wear out.
Yeah.
You fatigue from that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's important to do both. I mean, like what we do is like basically there's like 4 pillars to an eating pattern that helps you with your metabolic health. One element is to like keep your blood sugar steady. So avoiding like things that are high glycemic. And it doesn't mean ketogenic diet, but it means like
Mhm.
slow carbs. And then the next step is getting enough protein. So eating protein consistently at every meal for sure. And ideally some snacks and ensuring that you're getting quality protein. So it doesn't have to be that you're having meat all the time, but there needs to be some animal protein. And then there can certainly be plant-based proteins and other type like dairy-based proteins if you tolerate it and things like that. But meeting your protein needs. The third pillar is getting enough plants and plant diversity and fiber. So basically for us, that looks like for women, like 4 to 5 cups a day of vegetables. So it's like a lot.
Mhm. That is a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot. Like people are like, I eat vegetables, check, I'm good, move on. I'm like, no, actually, do you eat 4 or 5 cups a day of vegetables?
Yeah.
And then the last piece is improving the inflammatory properties of the fats that we're eating. So not eating a low fat diet, but what I find is that people are getting quite a lot of omega-6 fats and that's
Right.
pro-inflammatory and that causes metabolic derangement. And I actually measure that in people's labs all the time that their omega-6 levels are high and their omega-3 levels are low. So like
Mhm.
rebalancing that helps a
Which is
lot.
super common in America. Like
Yeah.
it's typical for you to be over on omega-6 because
Mhm.
and most people don't know this, like the omega-6 oils are a lot of them are the ones that the American Heart Association has told us for years and years and years are the healthy ones.
Yeah.
And so we've become omega-6 dominant
Mhm.
and it's definitely something that
For
needs to
sure.
be corrected. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So doing those 4 things is life changing and it can certainly be I mean, just between the protein and the vegetables, that's often the best first 2 steps because those are crowding out things. And then you're not really taking the carbs out, but you're shifting often the choices that you're making and the quantities. The fat piece is harder than it sounds because it's not like people are dumping a bunch of vegetable oil on their food at home,
Right.
and except salad dressing they are, but it's like
Yeah.
you don't realize it's in your bar, your coffee creamer, the dressing you got it like a salad when you ordered a salad or any salad dressing. If you like
Right.
go out to a
Yeah.
restaurant or if you eat at home, it's in a popped popcorn that you get. It's in your dried seaweed. It's what they cooked your restaurant meal in. It's ubiquitous in our food supply. Even if you yourself don't even own a bottle of vegetable oil, you're probably eating it every day.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Make your own salad dressings, people.
Yeah, definitely. But
Use olive oil.
so easy.
Yeah. What are your favorite oils? Just as a kind of a side note, like what oils do you recommend?
Yeah, so like I think the biggest thing I'll have people do is like pay attention to like smoke points. So if you never want to heat an oil above its smoke point. So the first question I'm asking is like, okay, well how hot is this food going to get? If I'm going to go above like 350, I'm going to be doing either an animal fat like a lard or I'm going to be doing a high heat oil that like an avocado oil can get very hot and that's fine. But if it's going to be a cooler temp, then I can do like an olive oil.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
I'm like kind of checking because like a lot of this stuff, I'm like, yep, okay, good. I say that too. Cause like I
Nice.
said at the beginning, I'm not like a registered dietitian. I just
Naming it.
have, yeah, yeah. I'm like, okay, yep. That's what we do. That's what my clients do. We do quite a bit on hormone health and getting those hormones, insulin, leptin, ghrelin, like you were mentioning, back in line. So
Awesome. Nice work.
good.
They're lucky to have you. There's a lot of confusing places to find nutrition help that makes it feel hopeless. So it's good that you're there to
Yeah.
help support.
Well, and two, I think for a lot of women, they come in and they're like, I don't know. I just don't even know what's healthy anymore. But it's really not a lack of knowledge. Like
Mm.
all of this is available on Google, like, which is how you were saying, like, don't just work with the mindset, but people know all of this. Technically, they think they're confused. But if they take a step back and I'm like, what's worked for you before? Where do you feel amazing? Where do you get the most energy? And they're like, yeah, it's when I was
Yeah.
eating high protein and a lot of vegetables. I'm like, yeah, you
Yeah.
actually do know. And so that's where kind of like the mindset piece does come in is to choosing that diet again,
Yeah.
choosing, and by diet, I don't mean an official capital D diet, but just your
Like an
diet
eating
is what you
pattern.
eat in the day, eating pattern. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wish there were two words for it, like being on a diet as opposed to your eating pattern for the day
Yeah.
is your diet.
Your
But
dietary methods.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. Any last words of wisdom here for us?
No, just it's amazing the work that you do. And thanks for having me on. I really love the chance to really just talk about what's true with nutrition. And hopefully this wasn't discouraging, but more just a source of hope of there is truth with nutrition. Nutrition can be life changing. It's just a matter of like finding a responsible resource that is actually like resonates with you and like your needs, whether it be that you need the framework technically you're a nutrition, or if you need more help on the mindset side of food. And most of us can benefit from both sides of that coin. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's really
for
fun.
sure. Good. Thanks so much for spending your time and coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having
So,
me.
can you tell people where they can connect with you or learn more about what you do?
Sure. Yeah. People, probably the best way is our website is empowerednutrition.health. And you can learn more about our insurance-based functional medicine practice and what plans we take and what problems we help solve. And there's also a contact page there if you want to chat with me about anything.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Hey, thanks for listening today. If you're ready to get some personalized coaching from me, I'd encourage you to schedule a free strategy session. Visit www.wellwithlisa.as.me, or it's easier just to find that link in the show notes. We'll talk about where you currently are with your weight loss goals, and I'll give you some actionable tools you can start implementing right away. Before you go, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can receive new episodes right when they're released. And if you're learning something new and enjoying the podcast, I'd love for you to leave me a 5-star rating and a review. Thanks again for joining me, Lisa Salisbury, in this episode of Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well.